Calver Ruen was an experienced hunter who knew the Bighorn Mountains better than most. Creno Dale was a career criminal with a history of violence and no reason to be in Wyoming. Narek Sims died in prison years ago, but his blood was found on a knife buried deep inside a truck that had been missing for a decade. When Calver vanished on a solo hunting trip, no one expected his disappearance to be the beginning of a tangled mystery involving stolen identities, a secret buried in the forest, and a ghostly figure known only as Jonas Keel, who may still be out there, hiding in plain sight. In the remote stretches of northern Wyoming, where pine trees stretch toward the clouds and winding dirt roads vanish into the wilderness, a man named Calver Ruen prepared for what would be his last hunting trip. Calver was 41 years old, quiet by nature, and drawn to solitude like a moth to low flame. He was not a man of many words. He didn't enjoy crowds or noise. He worked in town as a mechanic, lived in a modest cabin just outside 10 Sleep, and found his peace in the silence of the forest. Every fall, without fail, Calver packed up his gear and drove into the mountains for a 5-day hunting trip alone. In October of 2012, he followed the same routine. He loaded up his green pickup, truck with supplies, canned food, water, hunting equipment, a rifle, spare clothing, and his old map books. His neighbors remembered seeing him drive away early in the morning with a coffee mug in one hand and his dog-eared hunting journal tossed in the passenger seat. The weather was crisp but clear, and the mountain trails had not yet been buried by early snow. He told no one exactly where he was going, but everyone assumed it was one of the forested areas he'd explored in previous years. For Calver, disappearing into the wild for a few days wasn't out of the ordinary. He had done it many times before. But when the 5th day came and went, and there was no sign of Calver, concern turned quickly to panic. His sister, Denna, was the first to alert authorities. She hadn't heard from him, and his cell phone rang endlessly. It wasn't like Calver to forget to check in. He may have liked being alone, but he wasn't careless. He respected nature and knew its dangers. That's what made the silence so strange. The Washakie County Sheriff's Office launched a search that same evening. Helicopters flew over ridgelines, volunteers combed the underbrush, and dogs were brought in to track scents. They focused on known trailheads and backcountry roads where Calver was believed to frequent. Still, nothing turned up. Not a single piece of his equipment, not one tire track from his truck, not even a shell casing. It was as though the forest had swallowed him whole. Local news stations covered the story for weeks, showing his photo beside shots of the rugged terrain. Theories swirled. Maybe he had gotten lost, or injured, or attacked by an animal. Perhaps he had chosen to vanish on his own. But none of it seemed to fit. Calver wasn't reckless, and he had no reason to disappear. His finances were stable, and he had no known enemies. He was someone who lived simply, didn't take risks, and stayed far from trouble. As the weeks turned into months, search teams pulled back, and the case slipped into the pile of the unsolved. His family held on to hope, but every passing season without answers made it harder to believe he would be found alive. The forest is deep, and the secrets it keeps can stay hidden for decades. Without a body, without a vehicle, without a single trace, the sheriff's office had little to go on. The only clue was the complete lack of evidence itself. By the spring of 2013, Calver Ruen's disappearance had become a quiet mystery, spoken about in low voices in local bars and campgrounds. Hunters who knew him speculated among themselves. Some believed he had been taken by the elements. Others whispered about strangers seen passing through the mountains around that same time. But without facts, all anyone could do was guess. Calver's family placed a bench near a scenic lookout where he once watched the sun set over the valley. His sister would sit there in the evenings, staring out over the wilderness, wondering if her brother was still out there, somewhere beyond the trees, waiting to be found. 10 years had passed since Calver Ruen vanished into the wild, and most People had accepted that he was gone for good. The sheriff's office kept the case file stored on a dusty shelf, marked with faded ink and forgotten urgency. Every few years, a new officer would flip through it, look at the sparse notes, and quietly close it again. There had been no new leads, no tips, no accidental discoveries. Just silence. But in early May of 2022, everything changed with one unexpected phone call. A hiker named Trent Halber, exploring a restricted part of the Bighorn Mountains, stumbled onto something deep in the woods. He had taken a route not listed on official maps, following a dry stream bed that led into thick undergrowth. He wasn't looking for anything, but what he found would open the case in a way no one could have imagined. Wedged between two dense trees with branches grown through the grill and moss spreading across the hood was an old pickup truck. The windows were shattered. The tires had long since gone flat. It looked like it had been sitting there for years, untouched and unnoticed. The forest had tried to bury it, but not completely. Trent recognized the strange sight for what it was, something that didn't belong, and immediately called authorities. The vehicle was hard to access, buried in deep woods with no clear road nearby. Recovery teams took nearly a day to reach the site. When they finally pried open the rusted doors, they were met with the unmistakable stench of decay, even after so many years. In the driver's seat, buckled in with a frayed seatbelt, were skeletal remains slumped forward over the steering wheel. The body was dressed in hunting gear, though what remained was faded and torn. The license plate was barely visible, but enough to run. Within hours, the results came back. The truck was registered to Calver Ruen, the same vehicle he had driven into the mountains a decade ago, the very truck he had vanished in. The initial reaction was grim relief. After all these years, it appeared that Calver had finally been found. But the story was far from over. As per procedure, the remains were sent for forensic analysis to confirm identity. What came back stunned everyone. The remains did not belong to Calver Ruen. The body in the truck was someone else entirely, a man named Crino Dale, identified through dental records. He was 38 years old at the time of death, and had a criminal record that spanned across 3 states. His last known residence was a motel in Idaho. He had no hunting license, no known ties to Wyoming, and no reason to be driving Calver's truck. Detectives scrambled for answers. How had Crino ended up behind the wheel of a vehicle last seen? With a missing man? Had he stolen it? If so, where was Calver? And why would Crino have taken the truck into such a remote area, only to die there? The inside of the truck was damaged by time. Water had seeped in through broken windows, and small animals had nested in the back seat. Most of the electronics were ruined. However, crime scene investigators did manage to recover a knife tucked beneath the passenger seat. It was rusted but intact. On the handle was dried blood, preserved just enough for testing. The blood belonged to neither Calver nor Crino. It matched a third man, someone the sheriff's office had never even heard of. Suddenly, what seemed like the closing of a long, cold case became a new beginning. There were more players in this mystery than anyone had imagined. How had 3 men, unknown to each other, become connected through a truck buried in the woods? And why had no one ever come forward with a word about any of them crossing paths? The discovery raised more questions than it answered. As the sun set over the forest that had hidden the truck for so long, it was clear that the story of Calver Ruen wasn't finished. Something had gone terribly wrong during that hunting trip. And someone, maybe more than one person, had made sure the truth stayed buried for as long as possible. The discovery of Crino Dale's body inside Calver Ruen's truck sent shockwaves through the small town of Ten Sleep and beyond. For years, the disappearance had been written off as a tragic accident, a man lost to the wild. Now, a new name had surfaced, one with no connection to the missing hunter and no explanation for why he had died behind the wheel of that truck. Detectives quickly dug into Creno's background. He was no stranger to law enforcement. His record stretched back nearly 2 decades, a messy string of thefts, drug possession, assault charges, and parole violations. He had spent time in and out of jails across Montana, Idaho, and Utah. In his last known booking photo, taken in 2018, Creno looked tired and worn, with sunken eyes and a deep scar running down his jaw. He had a history of drifting between towns, taking on small jobs, and living mostly off-grid. But nowhere in his records was there any mention of Wyoming. The question that haunted investigators was simple but crucial. How did Creno end up in Calver's truck, miles deep into the Bighorn Mountains? If he had stolen the vehicle, where? Did the theft occur? And why had he driven it into a forest with no roads and died there without a trace until now? Detectives scoured digital records. They checked gas station security footage from 2012, traffic cams, phone logs, anything that might place Creno in the same time and place as Calver. But there was nothing. His name didn't appear on any lists of suspects from the original investigation. He wasn't even a whisper in the case's past. It was like he had dropped into the story from nowhere. As forensic work continued on, the knife found under the seat, the lab delivered another unexpected development. The dried blood on the handle belonged to a man named Narek Sims. He was a convicted burglar who had died 3 years earlier in a Nevada prison from a drug overdose. His DNA had been in the national system, which is how the match was made so quickly. With Narek now involved, investigators tried to determine how he, Creno, and Calver were all connected. No shared hometowns, no shared jail records, no evidence of working together. No overlapping social media ties. Still, there had to be a reason all 3 men's lives had collided so violently. Detectives turned their attention to Narek's time in prison. They interviewed former cellmates and reviewed his personal belongings, hoping to find anything that could explain his connection to the other 2 men. In one of the prison boxes, they found something peculiar: a hand-drawn map on the back of a food label. It showed a section of forest with rough lines forming ridges, a winding river, and a large X marked in red ink. On the bottom corner, the letters CR were written in shaky handwriting. Investigators believed it was shorthand for Calver Ruen. The map had no labels or coordinates, but to someone familiar with the Bighorns, it looked eerily similar to the region where the truck had been discovered. This discovery raised a dark possibility. Had Calver stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see during his trip? An illegal operation, maybe? A stash of something hidden in the woods? Had Creno and Narek been there at the same time, and was Calver in the wrong place at the wrong time? One working theory took shape. Creno and Narek had set up something in the forest, possibly a drug or weapons drop site, and Calver had unknowingly wandered into it. That could explain why all 3 names were now tangled together. But if that were the case, then why had Calver's truck remained missing for 10 years? And why had Creno died inside it? The pieces didn't fully fit. Creno could have stolen the truck after something happened to Calver, but if so, why drive it into the mountains and abandon it, only to die there himself? And what had happened to Calver's body? The mystery was no longer just about a man gone missing. It was becoming something larger, something hidden under layers of silence, fear, and time. The deeper investigators dug, the more they realized that Calver Ruen's story was tied to a web of secrets stretching far beyond one man's hunting trip. With Creno Dale confirmed dead inside Calver Ruen's missing truck, and Narek Sims now tied to the scene by a blood-stained knife, investigators felt the mystery tightening around them. 3 men, 1 missing, 1 dead in a vehicle that wasn't his, and 1 long gone from a prison cell, all converging on a patch of forest that had kept its secrets for over a decade. Theories multiplied. Some believed it was a simple robbery, gone wrong. Others thought it was a planned ambush, a cover-up, or even a smuggling operation disguised as a camping trip. But without Calver's body, there was no way to confirm any version of events. That changed when a state investigator, curious about how Narek Sims could be involved, took a deeper look into his prison records. Buried among the intake notes and routine disciplinary forms was something easily overlooked: a brief mention of a conversation between Narek and another inmate during a group therapy session in 2015. Narek had spoken vaguely of a robbery up in the mountains that ended in a hunter disappearing. At the time, the counselor assumed it was a fantasy. It was common for inmates to brag or invent stories to seem dangerous or mysterious. But now, that detail seemed eerily specific. Narek had said he didn't pull the trigger, but he helped bury the problem. That phrasing stuck with detectives. It suggested that Calver hadn't just vanished, he had been murdered and hidden. Investigators wondered whether Crino and Narek had lured Calver into a trap, or whether he had unknowingly stumbled onto something they were doing. Either way, it was likely Calver had paid for it with his life. They revisited the map found in Narek's prison belongings, the one with the large red X. An expert in wilderness navigation analyzed the lines and terrain markings, eventually matching them to a stretch of forest northwest of where the truck had been discovered. It was an area rarely visited by hikers, dense, steep, and far from any marked trail. With the assistance of a search and rescue team, detectives hiked into the region, following the crude map as best as they could. Days of searching led to nothing. Frustration grew, and some began to question whether the map had been a bluff or a fantasy. But on the sixth day, deep beneath a hill shaded by old pines, a cadaver dog signaled strongly near the base of a fallen log. The team began to dig. Beneath, layers of compacted soil, roots, and leaves, they uncovered a decomposed body wrapped in what remained of a weathered tarp. Dental records confirmed it. Calver Ruen had finally been found. The man who walked into the woods and never returned had been lying just miles from the hidden truck the entire time. His remains told a grim story. He had been shot twice in the back, execution style. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds. He likely never saw it coming. Near the body, buried separately under a flat stone, was a half-melted GPS device and the remains of a burned hunting license. These items had likely belonged to Calver, and someone had tried to destroy them, perhaps to hide his identity. But time and nature had preserved just enough for the truth to survive. With Calver's body recovered, the case seemed to finally reach its resolution. Investigators now believed that Calver had unknowingly entered a criminal operation hidden in the woods, one orchestrated by Crino and Narek. Whether it was drugs, illegal hunting, or something else, they didn't want witnesses. Calver became a liability. After his murder, Crino likely took the truck and tried to escape or move further into hiding. But something went wrong. Maybe he got injured, maybe he was stranded, or maybe he simply gave up. Alone in the wilderness, the forest claimed him too. The blood trail had led investigators to one terrible truth after another. But one question remained. Was there a fourth person out there? Someone who had helped, someone who knew and had kept it hidden all these years? That possibility would haunt the town long after the case was closed. After the recovery of Calver Ruen's body and the confirmation that he had been murdered in the woods a decade earlier, investigators believed they had most of the answers. The evidence pointed toward a violent encounter involving Crino Dale and Narek Sims, two men with criminal pasts and no reason to be in the same place as Calver unless they had something to hide. But even as officials prepared their final reports, and the town of Ten Sleep began to mourn with more clarity than before, one detail refused to settle. The idea of a fourth man, someone still alive, someone who had never come forward, kept nagging at the edges of the case. It began with a photo. While reviewing Crino's last known motel stays, detectives tracked down an old security camera hard drive from a truck stop in Riverton. dated just 3 days before Calver vanished. It showed Crino and Narek fueling up an unfamiliar vehicle. With them was a third man, tall, thin, and wearing a black cap pulled low. His face was barely visible, but it was clear he wasn't Calver. They couldn't match him to any known associates. He had never appeared in any prison record or background check tied to either Crino or Narek. But there he was, quietly moving around the vehicle, loading supplies, acting as though he belonged. Investigators couldn't shake the feeling that this man was the missing link. They issued a public appeal, releasing still frames from the footage and asking for tips. Most led nowhere. A few people thought they recognized the man, but names didn't check out. Then, weeks later, a tip came from an unexpected place, a wilderness guide named Enoa Treston, who worked with a backcountry survival school out of Cody. She claimed to have seen that same man in late 2012. He had arrived at a supply post in the Bighorn region, asking strange questions about forgotten trails and unmarked territory. He paid in cash and used no name. Her memory was clear because he seemed paranoid even then. He spoke little, but watched everyone. He was interested in old mining areas, locations far from any trail map. That tip aligned perfectly with the area where Calver's body had been found. Using Enoa's description and the truck stop footage, a forensic artist created a digital reconstruction of the man's face. It was sent to federal agencies. Weeks passed. Finally, a partial match came back. Not a name, but a connection. A man matching that appearance had been questioned in 2010 during a weapons trafficking investigation in Colorado. He was never charged, and his identity at the time was fake. But the details mattered. The man had used the alias Jonas Keel. He'd vanished after the inquiry and had not surfaced again. Until now. If he was involved in the forest operation with Crino and Narek, it would explain a lot. Maybe he had been the one who orchestrated the encounter with Calver. Maybe he had been the one to pull the trigger. And maybe he had left his partners behind, knowing the forest would erase what remained. With no DNA, no confirmed identity, and no digital footprint, Jonas Keel became a ghost in the investigation. But his presence in the truck stop footage rewrote the ending of the story. Calver hadn't simply been in the wrong place. He had walked into something planned, something dangerous, and something he was never meant to walk away from. In a private memorial held by Calver's family, they finally laid him to rest beside his parents. His sister Denna spoke quietly, surrounded by neighbors who had followed the case since the first day. Though justice had not come fully, they knew now what had happened to him. The silence was over. Yet in law enforcement circles, the story remained open. Somewhere, the man known as Jonas Keel might still be alive, older, quieter, watching from a distance. The forest had revealed some of its secrets, but it had also left behind a final echo. One man vanished, another died, a third was already gone, and a fourth had never been caught.